So, good evening, everybody. This is Dr. Felicia with Skillset Counseling, and today I'm going to be discussing something that you all have talked about or asked me to talk about on my videos, and that's going to be discerning the difference between healthy and I would say maybe abusive or toxic leaders. And so many of you have had questions about either being in a new spiritual environment, checking out a new spiritual environment, and how to know whether the leader that you are the leader that is in that environment is one that's going to be a safe and a healthy leader. So I'll wait for a few seconds here to see if we can get some more people in the chat room here. And then also, too, if you have other questions about anything related to spiritual abuse, go ahead and put that in the chat so that that can be addressed. So let's see. So before I get into the differences between healthy and abusive leaders, I just want to first of all go over what spiritual abuse is, at least how I construe it. There are different definitions out there regarding what it looks like. The way I see spiritual abuse, it happens when somebody is using spirituality to cause harm. A lot of times that can happen when there is a power differential. So there's a leader and then there's somebody who's not a leader. But that doesn't always happen that way. People who are members of a spiritual environment can spiritually abuse each other. There are instances where spiritual abuse happens outside of spiritual environments. So some of you have talked about your own experiences, growing up and dealing with spiritually abusive family members, which can really be tough. So that's basically in a nutshell what spiritual abuse is. And it's not only when spirituality is used to cause harm to someone. It also occurs when spirituality is used as a way to justify that type of harm. And sometimes when spirituality is used to justify the type of abusive behavior that's going on, there's no intervention. So somebody can see what's going on, and instead of intervening or encouraging the person to leave that situation, instead they are just told, well, this is the norm for our environment or whatever. Basically, spirituality is used to justify harm being done. So if you are new here, you can say hi in the chat, or also put in a question that you have for me. So anyway, I was talking about spiritual abuse and how it can occur, and how it's not only actively causing harm to somebody, but also using spirituality as a way of justifying that harm, especially justifying the lack of intervention for that harm. And so when I have been looking over the comments that you all have put in either community posts or the videos, a lot of you have had experiences with leaders who are abusive, and you have asked how to discern the difference between an abusive leader and a healthy leader. And I will attempt to go over some ways that you can do that during this video. The thing about even trying to discern the difference is it's not as easy as we would think. People who are spiritually abusive, from just the research that I've done and from what I've observed, rarely ever show their red flags at the beginning. And so a lot of times people will look back and say, wow, that wasn't a very healthy environment, or that leader didn't seem healthy, but it's only something that you realize in retrospect. Oh, hi, I see a comment here from New Biology 101. Good to see you back. Good to see you. And if anyone else in the chat wants to say hi or ask a question or a comment or drop a comment, please feel free to do so. So a lot of times people will look back at their experiences and wonder, well, how come I didn't know that this leader was abusive? And you're not going to know because individuals like this rarely ever show their red flags at the beginning. If they did, they wouldn't be effective at what they do, which is manipulating people and things like that. So when a lot of times when people are assessing these experiences and trying to understand, how did I get into this situation, why is this leader the way they are, you find out that there are going to be certain things that, in my opinion, set aside set aside the or not set aside rather it's they show the differences between healthy leaders and leaders that aren't healthy. So the first criteria that I look at is, how do they lead, right? What do they lead with? And every leader leads with something. And when I say, what a leader leads with, it is sort of like the best way I can put it is what their brand is, right? So if we think about different leaders that we know, either personally or professionally, they tend to have a brand or something that sets them apart and makes them unique. And when we look at least from my perspective, when I analyze situations where people have been in spiritually abusive environments, those leaders tend to lead with things other than their character. So it might be their charisma, right? It might be their personality. It's going to be something that acts like a red herring, and it's not something that is really it's not substantial. So, if you think about maybe a boss or a leader or somebody that you've worked with either professionally or personally or whatever in your past, think about how you related to them, and specifically think about how, if they weren't a great leader or you had a really bad experience with them, think about what their brand was, right? Do you feel like they led with their character, or do you feel like they led with other things that were kind of a distraction? And so sometimes, and I'm not saying that abusive leaders have big personalities or anything like that. There's nothing wrong with having a big personality or a strong personality. However, when a leader is leading with that and making that the focus of their leadership, what ends up happening is that the parts of their character that should be under analysis really aren't, they don't have a chance to come to the surface. It's kind of like a smoke screen. So that's something that is important to look out for. Again, it's not saying that great leaders, shouldn't have any type of personality or anything that makes them unique. But when the emphasis for them is their personality and like their brand and things like that, it may mean that they're trying to cover up something. And so you want to pay attention to that. Another thing that you want to pay attention to is how the leader interacts with people. Now, leaders are always going to have people that they may be closer to, and people that, they're going to have their inner circle. There's nothing wrong with a leader having their inner circle. But if you notice that the leader tends to have a lot of favorites, right? Or maybe they have a group of people that maybe their group of favorites like changes often. We've talked about this before in prior live streams, but sometimes these leaders will make and break people. So they'll have their right hand people, and then all of a sudden they'll have a new group of right hand people. And when that changes often, that can be a red flag to show you that, that it's kind of like having a company where there's a high turnover. If you're working with a leader who seems to have a new group of favorites very often, it means that they might have difficulty really working with others and retaining people to stay with them. So that could be a red flag. And especially when some people have shared their stories about how they were in a situation, they were in a setting where the leader would break people publicly, right? There'd be things like maybe shaming them, um, saying things about them in a way that could be very humiliating. So when you see a leader doing things like that, that should be a red flag. And that can be associated with having that group of people around them changing often. So those are a few things that I think are important. Something else that is important too is understanding how that leader works with and relates to emotions. Now, we all have emotions, we all express them in different ways. However, something that should be of concern to you when you're analyzing your leader or your spiritual environment is how do they express their emotions, right? Do they express their emotions in ways that are unrestrained, ways that are harmful? Do they tend to fly off the handle? And it's not just with anger, too. They can, if you sense or feel like they just are overly emotional, that over emotional reaction, especially if it's not addressed or handled in a professional, restrained way, can indicate a deeper issue. So that's something to look out for. And again, nothing wrong with emotional expression. I think that's healthy and that's important, but is it out of control? Is it used as a way to manipulate other people? So you want to be careful with that. Um, so I'd like to hear from you in the chat. What are some ways that you feel are important to, vet leaders that maybe it's a place you're checking out. You're not sure if they are a good leader, a healthy leader, supportive leader. What are some things that you would do to check them out? So I'll take a minute to ask from you all in the chat and see. And I'll also put it in the comments as well. All right. So I mentioned a few. I've mentioned how how they relate to other people around them. Their groups of favorites, how they relate to emotions. Self-centered is a red flag. Hi, Jimmy Jack. Yes, and in fact, that's uncanny because I was about to discuss that as the next one. Self-centered is a red flag. That's true. Leaders that are self-centered. However, it can be hard to determine whether a leader is self-centered. And one way that I think could be important is how they engage in self-disclosure. What I mean by self-disclosure is how they talk about themselves. There's some leaders that talk a great deal about themselves, and the way they do it is to create a particular picture or image of themselves that can be used to their benefit. Somebody had mentioned this in one of the other chats before about how a leader that they left was very, what did they say? They said something about how this leader was always trying to paint themselves as a victim. And they said everywhere they went, everybody was against them, the world was against them. And so they got ahead of this story and they crafted stories and crafted this narrative about themselves that they were the victim. And so because of that, it had everybody ready to defend this leader regardless of what they did. And so that can be a self-centered way of disclosing information about yourself as a leader. And that's something definitely to watch out for. I think that's a huge red flag. Okay, hi, Vivian. Vivian says how they interact with people in the community when no cameras or a lot of people are around. Yeah. That's a big one. Many of you have talked about how the leader was one way in public and one way in private. That's something that I hear a lot. Do any of you relate to that in the chat? Do you ever, I'll also type it in. Um, okay, I see another comment here. Let's see here. It says, sounds similar to a Messiah complex. Yeah. Yeah, sometimes with some of these leaders who are not, who tend to engage in abusive behavior, you'll see them sort of play the hero and the victim at the same time. And so there's this idea of, everybody is against me, and here I am sacrificing myself for you all. So I'm now the hero. And so that's important to pay attention to. I think it's important for leaders to share some information about themselves. I think it can help them, be relatable, and it can also help with connection. But you want to pay attention to how the information is shared and what kind of information is shared. Does it feel to you like they're, trying to paint a particular narrative to make them look a certain way? So what are some other things? I'm seeing more people in the chat. If you are new here and you'd like to introduce yourself, go ahead. I'm seeing some new names, which is really neat. It's good to see people that I haven't seen before here. I always learn a lot from you all, so I appreciate your input and comments. So something else that I tend to see as a red flag is when a leader is they tend to motivate people through fear. They talk a lot about fear. And again, there are things that make sense for people to be afraid of, but many of you have talked about situations where you've served with leaders that talk a lot about bad things happening. If you do this bad thing is going to happen to you. They're always trying to paint this cloud of fear over everything people do. Oh, I see another comment here. Okay, so you're talking about how ex-cultists of Gnosticism and other occult groups. Are you saying that they tend to show these behaviors? And if you're saying that, I mean, I think that regardless of whatever situation or type of spiritual environment the leader is in, ones that are abusive and toxic tend to have certain qualities to them. So some people just lead with a lot of fear, and they talk about bad things that are going to happen to you if you do this. There's always this fear of the unknown, and they motivate people primarily through fear. And that never is an effective way of leading. It might control people for some time, but it does not work long term. Okay, I see another one, greed. Yeah. So somebody who is greedy. And what, leaders can, when we think about greed, we think about money, usually material possessions. But there are abusive leaders that are not only greedy for those things, they, with that greed comes a sense of entitlement to the resources and time of the people that they're supposed to be leading. And so there's this idea that the leader is in control and they come first above everybody else. And whatever the people have, they're entitled to. And one of the other videos that I had in the comments, somebody mentioned that their spiritual leader told people in the congregation that their homes had to be open to anybody at all times. And that reflects that entitlement, greedy mindset. Oh, okay. So someone says here that they found that the cult that they were in, they said, I found that the cult I was in, the leader jumped in between different roles, Messiah, God, and healer. Yes, that's a good one. You know, with these leaders that are abusive, they tend to, someone said they never knew who they were going to see that day. And when they switch rapidly between these types of roles, it confuses people and it keeps people on their toes because they want to make sure that whoever they're going to encounter that day, they want to make sure that they're on their good side. And so that is a subtle way of control, unpredictability, keeping people on their toes, keeping people guessing as to who they're going to meet that day. So that's a great observation. Almost a covert narcissist trait. Yeah, there's a video I have on that, and you know, I see a lot of similarities between covert narcissism and people in religious settings who are abusive, right? Because if you think about, and for those of you who don't understand what I'm talking about, there are different sorts of narcissism. I'm not going to get into all the different subtypes, but I will talk about the big two, which is basically, grandiose or overt, and then covert. And so with the grandiose and overt type, they are very much kind of like a peacock, strutting their feathers in your face. They're very upfront about how great they think they are. The covert way is more of the overly sensitive, very nice person. They present as very nice, but then when you rub them the wrong way, or you do something to cross them, then you really see the fangs come out. And so if you think about it in religious settings or in spiritual settings, it's going to be frowned upon for people to come out and be very, to be very like overt about thinking that they're better than other people. So that covert way of sort of humble bragging and using niceness as a veneer for abusive and narcissistic behavior fits hand in hand with the description of a covert narcissist. And so, yeah, you will see that. You'll see a lot of that in religious settings in religious and spiritual settings, because we tend to value niceness in those settings, right? Being humble, not being prideful. And so somebody who is a covert narcissist is not going to come across as prideful at the very beginning. That humble persona is very fake, right? Because you'll find out that if you don't go along with their agenda, then there's payback and there are repercussions. And so I one red flag for me in a spiritual environment or a spiritual leader is somebody or the group or the person emphasizing niceness. And when we put so much emphasis on being nice, it robs us of the opportunity to be authentic, right? And so if the emphasis is, oh, be nice, well, there's little authenticity with niceness. Niceness is basically just, maybe a step above being polite. And so be careful of people that either value niceness a lot or have this fake humility. Yeah, humble is easy to trust, shows the victim there is no threat. Very true, Josh. And this is how these environments, they tend to act that way. The leaders in those environments tend to act that way. They come across as very approachable, very vulnerable. So even in that self-disclosure that I was talking about earlier, sometimes even sharing things that seem rather intimate just so that they can gain your trust. And so when people have shared their experiences with abusive leaders, they'll often say that they formed a bond very quickly, or they felt that they gained their trust very quickly. So these are all really good, and you all are, providing some really important examples. So I'm not, so for, if you're new, I'm seeing some more people in here, but if you're new, say hi, ask a question. Any other red flags that you see? Um, one, clamorous, loud yelling preacher. Yeah. Yeah. Then that's something, I think this might have been up before you came in, Jimmy, but people, that have, pay attention to how these leaders, um, how they react emotionally. Sometimes when people are very reactive emotionally, that is a red flag of a deeper issue. Okay, someone else, Josh says here, red flag for me was how their stories are sold are so similar, even identical to stories that I've shared, creating a feeling of how similar we are. Yeah, yeah, that seems quite manipulative to me, because sometimes when that behavior is meant to build a false sense of intimacy. Something that's really important for people to remember is that trust takes time to build, and people who are in these abusive environments do not want to take the time that's necessary to build the trust, and so they're going to try and rush some of these processes through the things that we've talked about. Oh, that's a good one, Vivian. How they respond to challenges. That's really good. And so, think about that when the environment is going through a challenge, right? Maybe there's whatever the challenge is. Watch how the leader responds to that. Are they taking ownership of certain things if they need to? Are they blaming others? What are they doing? How are they responding to that? And that'll tell you a lot. Constant criticism. Yeah. A lot of you have shared how you would feel um, just talked down to a lot in these sorts of environments, name calling, weaponizing of language, things like that. So when a leader is constantly criticizing other people, then people are going to work harder to avoid that criticism and gain favor. They don't want to be the ones being criticized, so they're going to do whatever they can to get on the leader's good side, to be perceived favorably. Um, Something similar to how they respond to challenges is, some of when you are trying to assess the type of leader that you have, watch to see how or if they can admit that they don't know something. Something that concerns me is when a leader has to act like they have the answers to everything and that they know everything. On the contrary, it is a sign of true humility to say or to admit that there's some things that you don't know, right? I don't know this. I'm not sure about that. Let me look more into that. When somebody always has to insist that they know the right answer or they have an answer, that's concerning. You want a leader that can admit that they don't know everything or that they may need to look more into something, research something some more, take their time in making decisions. That's also important. Um, let's see if there are any other comments about that. So there are a few others that I have here in my notes. One is how they, relate to the people that they are leading. Some people have talked about how their leaders micromanage them. And so they'll get these texts asking, where are you? What are you doing? Who are you talking to? They feel like their whereabouts are being monitored. And then there's some that never hear from their leader unless they need something, right? And so they feel used, they feel like they're not important to that environment. And so think about how that leader engages with you and other people. And everyone's going to have their own interpersonal style as to how they relate to people and things like that. But do you feel like the way they interact with you, does that feel like does it feel, I guess, not only genuine, but does it feel like they care about you, right? Somebody who is monitoring your whereabouts all the time, that doesn't seem caring. And at the same time, somebody who's only checking in because they need something or they need something from you, that's not, that doesn't seem very caring either. So let's see what other notes I have here. So, and then also, we've talked about this in terms of, understanding your gut. What does your gut tell you? Sometimes people have said that they had a leader that something just didn't seem right about them. And even though they couldn't put their finger on it, they said something's just off about this person. And so there are videos that I have on trusting your gut, again, after spiritual abuse, but that's a very important thing to pay attention to. You can interact with a leader and you might feel that something's off about them. And that's something to note and come back later, to, because it's important. Okay. I see a comment here that says status manipulated. Can you explain what you mean by that? Josh, you said status manipulated, but I don't know. Maybe the text cut off or something. But if you could explain to me, that'd be great. And then, oh, hi, Liz. I see. Do you think having a group chat for a ministry is micromanaging behavior? It might be. What's going on in the group chat? That's what that's what would be helpful to know. So can you give me some more details about that? I don't think that, having text in and of itself is fine, but if you are getting texts at, hours that are inappropriate, like maybe, 1 a.m. or 3 a.m. asking, for something or saying, I need this right away. I don't like that at all. Okay, just daily devotional messages. I don't think there's anything necessarily wrong with that. But again, you can, if something feels off about it to you, pay attention to that. And, sometimes something like that might be used as a vehicle for other things, right? Maybe a way to message people a lot and kind of violate those boundaries of people's personal time and space. So you'd have to make that decision, but it's something to keep an eye out for. A group chat could just simply be, a group chat. But that's a good question. So we've talked about different traits of, different red flags that we can see with abusive leaders. And there are many more. These are just a few that I have picked out based on a lot of what you all have talked about in comments or posts or things like that. Oh, okay. So thanks for clarifying, Josh. It says given positions of power in the group, then threats of not living up to the role. Yeah, that's something that I talked about at the very beginning. And that is definitely a red flag. So basically, you'll see it's almost like this leader has a group of right-hand people, but if it's changing often, and if you feel like this person is sort of making people and then breaking them down, like building them up quickly, breaking them down, that's a red flag, because what that does is it keeps people scared. It's sort of like a fear-based control tactic, right? So if someone is in that position, they know that whatever position they're in is not going to be one that's held for long. And if they do want that position, they're going to have to do all kinds of things to keep that position, right? They don't feel secure. Yeah, public praise to private shaming. Yes, very much so. And so even pay attention to what people are praised for publicly. Sometimes, people have talked about how they felt that their volunteering at some of these environments was really abused and taken for granted. And sometimes people could be publicly praised for all this volunteering when in fact they're asking too much of everybody. So public praise, private shaming, those are important things to talk about. And even sometimes the shaming can be public. A lot of you have expressed concern over leaders that will shame you in various ways from the pulpit, and they may not use your name, but you know that they're talking about you. And that can be very, very disconcerting and very anxiety provoking. And that is another way of trying to control people. Um, Curious if that has happened to anybody here. Um, I'm going to put that question in the chat here. Okay, I see another comment here. The passive aggressive shaming and looking right at you to see your reaction. Yes, yes. That is, I've heard that story so many times, right? And so they won't use your name, but they're looking right at you as they're saying it, right? So that is, pay attention to things like that, different expressions, eye contact, how they interact with you. That whole idea of being being one way in public and being one way in private can be really concerning, because that shows you a lack of authenticity. I talked about this at the very beginning when fewer of you were here, but I said to analyze and pay attention to what your leader leads with, and think about it as perhaps maybe their brand or what sets them apart. And abusive leaders tend to really lead with charisma. I'm not saying leaders who have big or charming personalities are abusive, but when that's what they put forward, when that's what they're leading with, when it's a lot of fluff and smoke and mirrors and distractions, that's something to be careful of. Good leaders and healthy leaders have character, and character takes time to develop and to build. So going through challenges, disappointments, whatever it is, there are things that build people's character. And so when somebody does not have a strong character or a healthy character, then they're not going to lead with that. They're going to lead with things that look good and things that distract people. Ah, that's a good one, Josh. Praising the victim's actions that they were coerced to do, making them feel like it was their own idea. Yeah. You will notice that with a lot of abusive leaders, is that they're rarely upfront about what they want from you. And so I always tell people, if you don't trust a leader and they call you into a meeting, say, "Oh, I need to meet with you about something," try and get as many details as you can. Don't just go in there, because you can get blindsided. And a healthy leader will be upfront with you about what they want and what they expect, not coercing you and then praising you for what you were coerced to do. See another comment here. I noticed this too. Charisma is really that thing. Celebrity acting dispositions. Yeah, yeah. That's something that really that's a huge red flag for me. Uh, when when that's all you have, then when tough times come, when challenges come, you're not going to be able to lead your people effectively if all you have is this big, dazzling personality. And people have talked about the different characteristics they've seen of these leaders. They said that some people have said that they had a leader that just used humor all the time, and everything was a joke, always laughing, this and this. And so that humor really was used as a way to mask some very hurtful things that they would say. And they would say, "Oh, I'm just kidding," or "You know how I am." And so when they've made their brand humor, then it's easy to hide these verbal barbs and mean statements behind this mask of humor. some other, so think about that and really look at, what does your leader point to themselves? Do they direct a lot of attention to themselves, or do they direct attention to the things that are important? If you are in a group and you hear people quote the leader all the time, over other things that are important, that could be a red flag too. Oh, this person says this and this person says that, and it becomes almost this group centered around this person's personality versus the spiritual concepts that are supposed to draw people together. So pay attention to that. And even how they share information about themselves, also how they share information about other people. If you want a healthy leader guards information that they've been told. They don't just blab out information and share things that are private about other people. That's a good thing. The members become fans. Yeah. If you have a healthy leader, should be able to how do I put it? A healthy leader knows that they're not perfect. So they don't expect perfection from themselves, and they don't try to cast an image of being perfect. And so, I'm sure you've all heard of like the fandoms, right? And there are different, fandoms around certain like celebrities and musicians. And you know how they act if you say something bad about their celebrity, they get very upset, and they'll get together and gang up on whoever said the thing they didn't like. And so if you see that type of fandom behavior in a spiritual environment, that's a huge red flag. We all have strengths and we all have challenges. A healthy leader can admit that, and they have no problem with the people that they're leading knowing that they're not perfect. They don't try to create this image of perfection, and they understand that we all have strengths and weaknesses. So members becoming fans, huge red flag. Let's see. Something else that is important for, in terms of discerning healthy leaders from abusive ones is how they, are they flexible or are they rigid? Now, everybody's going to have their standards and the things that they are not willing to compromise on. But I get concerned when there's a leader who has very rigid and inflexible views on just about everything. And that is when we look at these fundamentalist groups that have that are pervasive and things like that, they tend to have these very strict ways of viewing the world, strict hierarchy, very strict ways of just thinking about the world. And while it's good to have standards, while it's good to have the things that you won't compromise on, being very rigid is a concern, because when someone is that rigid, then it means that they're not able to really see things from other people's points of view. It's just, this is the way things are, period. Has anybody ever dealt with that before? And what did that look like? I'm also going to put that question in the chat. And it's not just the leaders too. If you notice that people in that spiritual environment have that same way of thinking, that can be really concerning. So I'll wait and see, who responds to this. The question I have here: leaders who are overly rigid in their thinking. It's not just leaders too. There can be people in that environment. This also goes into this us versus them mentality that is common in spiritually abusive environments. And so with that very rigid way of thinking comes this very rigid way of looking at the world. And it's us, them. There's a very strong divide, and there's a very strict and inflexible way of looking at the world. So any other red flags that any of you have noticed, or just any comments, anything that you wanted to add to the discussion about this? So to sum up what I've talked about, you're not going to just be able to go into any environment and tell right away whether a leader is abusive. You might be able to, but oftentimes it doesn't happen, right? They're not going to be waving the red flags from the beginning, because that means that they're not going to be able to gain anybody's trust and control them. So it's important to look at characteristics over time. I always encourage people to journal, to just keep notes on the things that you have seen that maybe make you feel comfortable, things that don't. Okay, I see a comment here. They claim of having a sort of connection to secret knowledge beings. So this idea of, I have this special connection, I have this special knowledge. And that is when a leader leads with that, or when they, emphasize the special knowledge and things that they have, that is license for them to manipulate and control you. Many people have talked about how in these environments, people have said to them, well, God told me to tell you this, or God said this, and using God's name for manipulation. And when, a leader is saying that they have this special knowledge and this special connection, then what follows is, since I have this special connection and this knowledge, then you need to do what I say. A healthy leader would invite you to do things, right? Let's do this together, or this is what I think, this is the knowledge that I have, I will share it, or here's what I think, come to your own conclusions. Okay. There's another comment. Oh, there's a tradition that is ancient and was thought to be lost, and we're bringing it back. Yeah. Oh yeah, yeah. I've seen that too. There's some long lost information, or they have this special insight to decipher something that nobody else can. When there's a lot of this emphasis on specialized knowledge, the leader has this insight or knowledge that is not accessible to anyone else. That is a huge red flag, because what they're going to do is use that information to try and control you, right? If they're the only ones who have access to certain knowledge, then how are you going to verify that what they're telling you is true or not? Be careful of people that claim to speak on behalf of some higher power and make it seem like you can't hear or get knowledge for yourself. That's a prime way of control. Okay, I see another comment here. I vetted a leader for almost a year now. So far, perpetually late for church, missed a meeting, as well as disclosed personal details about another minister. Wow, yeah. So the part about disclosing personal information about other people is a huge red flag, because if they're talking about information that you deem, wow, that's pretty personal, and they're talking about somebody else like that, you'd wonder, and rightfully so, how would that person feel knowing that information is shared? And then also, what are they going to do about what you've told them? So those are great points that you all have brought up. And it's important, because I see here in the comment, you say you've vetted this leader for almost a year. Things like this take time. And so as you're going through this process of vetting an environment, vetting a leader, make sure that you also are being selective about what you share and how you interact with the environment. And it's not necessarily something, I'm not advocating being paranoid or being fearful all the time. That's not what I'm saying, but you also want to if it takes time for people to earn your trust, then on the same token, you also want to take that time in sharing information about yourself and getting committed and connected. Don't just throw yourself in there head first without really assessing what is around you. These are some great comments. So I'm about to wrap up. Are there any other questions or comments that you all have? Oh, another one. Okay. They have dreams of you and have seen either you fall from the group or your liberation. Yeah, that whole thing with dreams. I mean, people can have dreams about other people, but I've seen, where that abusive part comes in when they're using the dreams to manipulate people. I also have a video about something similar regarding prophetic abuse. And so saying that, well, this is what I see, or, this is this, using that information basically to try and control what other people are doing. And I noticed too in that comment, that either you fall from the group or your liberation. So sometimes they might, an abusive leader might quickly elevate somebody to a position that they might not be ready for, that they might not be qualified for. And that is a way of control. It's almost like setting them up to fail. So they rush them into this position, they put them in this position or whatever, they fail, and then they are, sort of either shamed or humiliated publicly, or just broken down. And so feeling made and then broken quickly can be devastating, especially when it's such a quick turnaround. So that's something that can also be used as a control tactic. Okay, see another comment here. Your spiritual leaders and environment should be a part of your growth and not your demise. It should be a true reflection of your thoughts about your life. There's something got cut off here, so I can't see the rest of your comment, but if not, okay, I said, if not, that may not be the place for you. That's great. I really like that comment. Yeah, I'm going to see if I can pin that message. That's great. But yeah, that it should be a part of your growth and not your demise. And so that's a great way of assessing, what's going on. Do you feel like the leaders are interested in your growth, or do they just want something from you? Right? Do they feel entitled to what you have, or do they understand that you're not there to be controlled, and that you have free will? How mental health issues are viewed. Something spiritual growth. There's this really annoying icon here, and it's blocking some of the words, so I can't see what you have here. It says how mental health issues are viewed as spiritual growth. Okay. Yeah, that's something that probably will be another topic that I'm going to write that down to talk about later. That's a great idea. Mental health issues and how they're looked at in these environments. I will say that in the limited time I have, that that's something else to be careful of. When people, if you're in a spiritual environment where they're equating health with spirituality, meaning the healthier you are, the better your life is, it means that things are good for you, then pay attention to that. Because on the other side of the coin of that, what that means is that if you are struggling, then you're going to be blamed for your struggles, right? And if we're going to be honest, there's some times where we play major parts in our own struggles. But if you're in an environment that emphasizes, okay, you're having this mental health issue, therefore you have this spiritual problem, that's a red flag. Yeah, hallucinations are viewed as psychic visions rather than psychosis. Yeah, with spiritual leaders, that are not that, that let me put it this way. A way that spiritual power can be abused is when a leader is working outside their capacity as a leader, right? So if a spiritual leader is now making or trying to make medical decisions or medical statements when they're not a medical doctor, or making definitive statements about mental health and they're not trained as a therapist, pay attention to that. That's a huge red flag. People have talked about how they've made major decisions around their medical and mental health because a spiritual leader who was not qualified in either of those areas told them, do this, do that. And that's causing harm to the person. So be careful about that. But that's definitely something that I will want to talk about at a later time. So thank you for bringing that up. It's been great chatting with you all this evening. I really appreciate the insights that you all have shared, and also how you have really been supportive of one another. So thank you all for that. And I will see you the next time I go live. Make sure you have your notification bell on, so that way the next time I go on live, some of you are saying that you're missing the lives. Make sure that you have your notification bell on, because then it will let you know when a live stream is or when I have a video. Okay. So I hope you all have a wonderful evening that is filled with peace. You're very welcome, Josh. Thank you for coming. I think this is probably the first time I've seen you here, so it's great to have you. And for others, for all of you who are here for the first time, thank you for coming and participating. It's really, we get a lot from these discussions when people actively participate and ask questions and share their comments. So thank you very much. So hope you all have a wonderful and peaceful evening and a great weekend. All right, bye-bye.